there, beautiful people. It's me, Emmy, and I'm back today with another Paint Chronicles. Last week's video was a little more on the bleak side, so I wanted to tell a happy story this week to sort of balance things out. Now, if you know me at all, I'm sure you know my fella Steve. I talk about him in pretty much everything that I do, so it's just kind of inevitable that you're going to hear about him. Today I want to tell you about the circumstances that led up to our meeting. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about the piece I'm working on here. I just want to say that I looked at the footage length of this video and wow! It was over 2.5 hours long. And I didn't even film the whole thing. So occasionally I use this handy dandy site called artprompts.org to give my brain a little bit of a rest. Nothing is worse than sitting down in front of your art supplies with a blank sheet of paper, pencils, paints, and ambition and then completely draw a blank for 15 minutes while you figure out where the fuck to start! The prompt that I followed for this video was, she has red hair and freckles scattered across her face like a sprinkle of cinnamon. That's a mouthful. So I thought a fun way to do this one was to literally do exactly what the prompt says. Later on you'll see the background, which is just kind of a teal blue sky with some cutesy little birds hanging out behind a girl. Now, to the story! This whole saga all starts out with a very good friend of mine who I will call Annie. Mostly because I don't know if she actually wants me to put her name out into the endless void that is the internet. Annie and I have been friends since the 6th grade. The first thing you need to know is that a year or so prior to all of the events I'm about to unfold for you, Annie had started online dating. During that time, she met a fellow named, let's call him Leroy. I believe they went on a couple of dates before she decided he really didn't seem all that into her and she moved on. The second thing you need to know is about 4 months before Steve and I met, I had just separated from my husband. Dun dun dun! Another story for another time. That's right. Anticipate. I had given up on love. No, seriously, I was all, fuck this Disney ass bullshit. I ain't need no man to take care of me or love me or treat me like a fool queen. I'm an independent woman. During the year 2014, in the month of April. Okay, sorry. Annie and I were working third shift at a nursing home. Guys, CNA work is brutal. If anyone who's listening to this works in the medical field, God bless. You really have to have a special heart to have the patience to not throw your shit while you're, cleaning someone else's shit. One night, Annie had mentioned to me that her still friend, Leroy, was working on making an independent film in a town about an hour away from where we lived, and he needed extras to play zombies. Of course, I found that premise very appealing. Sadly, that meant that we would have to leave almost immediately after our shift at 6 o'clock in the fucking morning, drive an hour away, put on zombie makeup, play extras Jenga, and then drive another hour back before we could get any kind of reprieve from our night of work. So we drove down to this Walmart parking lot and met up with several other extras, some of the main actors, and Annie's writer/director friend. Leroy gives everyone directions to the site where we're going to shoot this film, and he starts to get into his car. The third thing you need to know is that Annie was trying to set me up with Leroy. He was a nerd, he loved movies, games, he was into comics, visual effects, all of that. So she figured that we'd be a perfect match. She managed to get us into his car in the parking lot. Don't know how she did it. I sat in the front seat next to him while she sat in the back next to a friend we made from that shoot, and none other than my future beau. As we began the drive to the film site, the car was dead silent. Seriously awkward. Finally, a voice from the back of the car says, "I'm Steve, by the way, in case anyone was interested." The entire car burst into laughter, and that seemed to really break the ice. Suddenly, we're all chatty and having a good time. From what I remember of my time as an esteemed zombie, makeup was a do-it-yourself situation, the main actress was super fucking late, and Steve was one of the main actors in the film, and a VFX god. After the filming was done for the first scene we worked on, I noticed Steve and several of his buddies around a computer as they looked through the footage they already had. From a distance, I watched and gathered that he was in charge of storing the footage and a good deal of editing, along with Leroy, I believe. At this point, I had already made plans to move to Chicago to begin my education as an animator, and had attended several of their little classes that they gave. They gave us advice on basically how to present yourself as an open individual and network within the field. Networking. Oh yeah, we're networking. Oh yeah. I literally remember almost nothing from those little seminars. After the crowd had kind of dissipated from around Steve, I walked up to him with as much fake, I can't stress this enough, fake confidence as I could muster, and I introduced myself. Then the only thing I actually remembered from those little seminars, you know, the ones I mentioned, it actually came in handy. I asked him what he does, and that seemed to open a small bit of conversation. He told me about his love for visual effects, and I told him about my plans to pursue that career, and I was like, this guy's all right. So I don't remember very much else that happened that day other than the fact that I was super fucking wiped out, and I almost fell asleep on the couch that was in the house that we were filming. So after that, we went home, and I really didn't think much of it. About a month later, I mentioned to Annie that I was kind of ready to get back out there. Maybe not so much of a date as much as just hanging out with some friends that were not in our close group, which pretty much was just the two of us at the time. So she hit up Leroy and he hit up Steve, and we picked a place to meet up and decided to hang out there. We ended up going to watch a movie, Transcendence, in case anybody is wondering. I sat next to Leroy, again with Annie's intention of hooking the two of us up, and he was quiet the whole movie, which is fine, but I tend to like to make little comments during the movie, and I don't mind someone making little comments to me as long as it's not like completely disruptive. But I just sat there in silence next to him because there was not really a whole lot to do. But I could hear Steve on the other side of Leroy making all these tiny little wisecracks during the entire movie, and I was just cracking up because it was so funny, and it was refreshing to have that personality in such close proximity to me. It sounds so stupid. After the movie, I was like, hey, you guys want to go to a Starbucks or something and hang out? Leroy just kind of, I know a bar. And I was like, okay. I had never really been to many bars by that point in my life, so I was kind of a little leery on that aspect. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was like, okay, let's do it. So we ended up going to this little hipster bar in the middle of this downtown area, and this band shows up. Oh my God. The most hipster band I have ever heard of or heard in my entire life, and I was like, what is going on here? What this is real? So I ended up sitting next to Leroy again, and by this point in the night, I was not feeling it with him. I was like, this is not a thing. This is never going to be a thing, and I'm super okay with that. And some way or another, I ended up sitting next to Steve. We continued to entertain each other throughout the night, just laughing and making all kinds of comments about this band that was the hipsterest band I've ever seen. The lead singer had what we lovingly refer to as a tit-too. It was a tattoo right on his boob, and it was so funny to us, and we just kept making jokes about them and it, and there was a girl dancing around in the audience that had a hula hoop, and I think at some point a Dracula showed up or something along those lines, some man in a costume that just was totally, completely out of place, and it was the funniest thing to both of us. Leroy and Annie sat next to each other, and they were giving each other like some hardcore lover's eyes, I guess. And I was like, okay, well, they're gonna be a thing, and yeah, go for it, girl. Like, you get you some. So we spent the entire night just laughing and enjoying each other's presence and having a couple of drinks, but nothing too crazy before we decided to head out. We all walked to our cars, and I remember Leroy coming up and giving me this really awkward, like, side friend hug, and I was like, yep, okay, cool. And then Steve came up and gave me a hug, and I was like, oh my God, he smells so good. I know that's kind of ridiculous to say, but he smelled so good. I had such a good time with the four of us all together. That memory is such a treasured memory in my short lifetime. I'll never forget how accepted I felt and how everyone just seemed to be having a good time, and there was no pressure, there was no expectations. It was just really fun. Now, like I said, just that January, I had separated from my husband. I had spent those few months afterwards trying to sort of collect the pieces that were left of me after a difficult break. Again, another story for another time. But I started to rediscover myself and who I was and what I wanted in my life and what I expected out of people that were in my life, in my close circle. So after a while, I told Annie that I would like to start dating again. That was approximately a month after I had met Steve, and she was like, let me call up Leroy and see if he knows anybody. Of course, they were dating by then. Leroy called Steve up, and they had a little conversation. I have no idea what was said, but basically Leroy told Steve that I was interested in him and that maybe he should just hit me up. So as classy kids did back in the day, Steve and I added each other on Facebook, and he started to message me through Facebook Messenger. Once we got past the initial awkwardness of first trying to start a conversation with somebody that you don't really know, things seemed to flow a little bit more smoothly. We talked about comedians, movies we liked, video games, pretty much everything under the sun that we could think of, and we found that we had a lot in common. Bearing in mind the movies, he mentioned that his favorite movie was something called The Living Wake. Highly recommend if you have not seen it. He owned it, but you couldn't really find it anywhere else. There was no streaming service that would allow me to watch this movie. So in Messenger, he invited me over to his apartment, which was approximately 2 hours away from where I currently lived, and he told me I should come down and see him and stay the night. I promise I'll make it worth your while. I remember reading that text and being like, that bold bastard. Who does he think I am? I had no idea what to expect from him. I had no idea what he expected from me, but I was actually really, really excited, and I went down there with almost no hesitation. So I think this is where I'm gonna go ahead and pause my story. In the next video, I'm gonna go ahead and finish this piece that I have here. Don't forget to click that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. Yeah. And also follow me on Instagram at Emmy's Art Stuff. Thank you guys so much for joining me this week, and I can't wait to finish this story next week. It's going to be super fun, so let me know down in the comments what you think. If you want to see something different or something new, or even if you have any ideas for me to draw or paint something, that would be really cool. Until next time, stay creative.